In this video, I'm going to teach you two important things: how to use Convex to create full stack applications, and then how to use Convex Auth for user authentication and authorization. Now, what exactly is Convex? Convex is a backend as a service, and by backend as a service, I mean provides a lot of backend functionality such as authentication, a real-time database, file storage, etc. A real-time database in this context simply refers to this idea that users can subscribe to changes in the database, and whenever something changes, these changes will be transmitted to all the users on the client side. I will show you an example of a reactive database a little bit later in the video. Okay, let's start by creating a fresh Next.js application. I'm going to execute this command npm-run-all create next app, and let's use the latest version of the CLI tool. And I'm going to name this project Convex Fullstack app. I will choose all of the default options. Now I will open this folder inside of my code editor. Now before we set up Convex, let's install some of the other packages that we need, specifically Zod and ShadCN. So I'm going to execute this command npm add Zod, and then I'm going to install ShadCN. So for that, I'm going to execute this command npm-dlx ShadCN latest version, and then init. I'm also going to pass this -d flag, which basically means accept all of the default options. And by the way, if you're using npm, the command for you would be npx shadcn latest init -d. Next, I'm going to install a lot of components that I'm going to be needing in this project from ShadCN, specifically avatar, button, card, checkbox, drop-down menu, form, input label. Alright, so all of the components has been installed. Now before I start the development server and take a look at this application, let's first go to layout file, and I'm going to change a few things in this layout file. I'm simply going to replace all of this code with this simple code. So the thing that I have changed is, first of all, I'm using the inter font. Then I have updated this metadata that we are creating a full stack Convex app. And then I have applied some of the tailwind classes to this body and main element. Okay, let's now go to this page.tsx that is present inside of this app directory. This basically represents the home page of our application. Now I'm going to get rid of all of this code. Let's add an hello world for now. Perfect. Now to give a better structure to our application, I'm going to add some of the components. The first component that I'm going to be creating is this navbar component. So this is a very simple component, as you can see. This just renders this nav element with some of the other stuff over here. Let's go to layout file and include this above the main JSX element. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so this is our navbar, as you can see over here. Okay, let's now set up Convex. The first step is to install the Convex package. To do that, I'm going to execute this command npm add convex. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npm install convex. Next, I'm going to be executing the command npm-dlx convex dev. This is going to start the development server for the Convex. Now, the first time when you execute this command, this is going to basically ask you to create a new Convex account if you do not already have that. If you have that, it is going to ask you to log into that account. As you can see, I am already logged in. Now it is asking me to choose a team. I'm going to choose my own account. Then it is asking me to give this project a name. So Convex full stack app is fine for me. I'm not going to change it. Now this is creating a new Convex project in the Convex cloud. And now we can see this message that Convex Functions ready. At this point, if you try to access the Convex dashboard, you'll see that a new project should be over here, Convex full stack app. And I can click on this to basically access the dashboard of this particular project. Now here are a few things that you need to know in this one. Now the first section is related to this health tab, which is basically giving you some of the important metrics related to your Convex dev deployment. Then we have this data section. Here we are going to be creating all of the tables that we need for our application. Then we have this function section. So Convex has this idea of functions. We will take a look at a lot of these functions a little bit later in the video. But the basic idea is that you create a lot of these functions to basically implement your API endpoints. Convex also give you access to this file storage. You could think of this as a replacement to S3 bucket. So you can use this to basically upload your files and serve these files to your users. And then we have the schedules. So schedules have basically two types of things: scheduled functions and then cron jobs. So imagine this scenario that whenever a user comes to your application, after 5 minutes, you want to send them a welcome email. You can do that with the help of these scheduled functions. Cron jobs, on the other hand, are basically allows you to set up those particular jobs which you want to run on a periodic basis. such as every single day, every single week. You get the idea. Now, the last thing that we need to see in this dashboard is the settings part. If I open this settings page, you'll see that we have a lot of options over here. But the most important part over here is these environment variables. So you can come here and you can create a lot of environment variables, which we'll be doing in the video. Okay, at this point, we have this basic idea of Convex dashboard. Now, the command that we just ran, npm-run-all convex dev, now this is a special command in a sense that this needs to be continuously running alongside your npm dev command, which essentially starts your Next.js development server. When we executed this command, it also created a Convex directory at the root of the project, as you can see over here. Now, this is the place where we'll be creating all of the functionality related to Convex for our application. And as soon as we add any code to this Convex directory, this Convex dev command is going to keep on listening to the changes in these files, and it is automatically going to sync all of these changes to the Convex deployment in the cloud. Now, before we go ahead, we need to understand a few important terms in Convex, specifically about functions. Now, we have multiple types of functions available to us in Convex, each serving different purpose. The first function that we should know is queries, and queries allows you to read data from database. Second is mutations. With the help of mutations, we insert, update, or delete data from the database. Then we have actions. So actions are those functions that can call third-party services, such as processing a payment with a Stripe. You get the idea. And then we have HTTP actions. Now, HTTP actions are those functions that can be used to build the HTTP API. Now, and this is especially useful in those scenarios when you need to set up a webhook or something in your particular project. Now, if you have this experience of setting up any kind of payment gateways in your application, probably like Stripe or something, you must know about these webhooks where whenever a payment gets done, Stripe basically sends you information about that payment so that you can basically listen to that event via a webhook and then update things in your database. Then we have internal functions. So internal functions are those functions which can be called by other functions. And these functions are not available to the Convex client directly. And finally, we have these validation functions. So validation functions are responsible for validating the data that we input and output in case of queries and mutations and actions. We will take a look at some of the functions that I just described a little bit later in the video. Now at this point, if you take a look at this, you'll see that I have executed this command npm-run-all convex dev, which basically npx convex dev, and this has started my Convex development server. Now if I need to open my application, I need to open another terminal, then execute this command npm dev, which is going to start a development server on the localhost 3000. I can click on this and it is going to open my application, right? Now, I do not like this idea of running these two commands every single time whenever I need to work on my application. So to improve the developer experience in this case, I'm going to install a very simple package called npm-run-all as a dev dependency. So I'm going to execute this command npm add npm-run-all. And make sure you install this as a dev dependency, okay? All right, then I can go to my package.json file. And then here, I'm simply going to add these scripts. So I basically replaced dev command with this particular thing. I have created two separate commands, frontend and backend. So backend is going to start the development server for Convex. Frontend is going to start the development server for Next. And then dev command is going to start both of these together parallelly. Let me show you. So I can come here. I can do npm run dev. And now you can see that my Convex dev server is running and my application is also running at localhost 3000. You can see Convex Functions ready. Now, since we are building a Todo application, we first need to create a Todo table. So inside of this Convex directory, I'm going to create a file called schema.ts. Okay. And then in this file, I'm going to import basically a few things. Define schema, define table from Convex server, v from Convex values. Now this file is going to export default function define schema. In this one, we have this object like structure where we are going to define the entire schema for our database. So right now, as you can see, I have only defined one table. The name of the table is Todos. And here I have specified that it has only two columns for now, title and completed. The V that you're seeing over here is called validator builder. And with the help of this, I can specify type of each of my column. For example, the title is going to be string, the completed is going to be a Boolean value. Now here's the interesting thing. Remember in the beginning I told you that whenever we add anything to this convex directory, the convex dev command is going to keep on watching things over here, and as soon as we make any changes, it is automatically going to sync all these changes to the convex deployment in the cloud. So that means if at this point I go to my deployment, go to data, you'll see that I have this to-dos table automatically created. Now, since we are building a CRUD-like application, so we are going to be using things like queries to read the data and then mutations to insert, update, and delete the data from the database. To do that, we need to wrap our application with a Convex client provider, specifically that part of your application in which you are going to use these things like query, mutations, things like that. So inside of this components folder, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this Convex client provider. And the content of this Convex client provider is just going to be like this. We're going to export default a function, Convex client provider. It is going to accept the children. And then we are importing Convex provider from Convex React. We are wrapping all of the childrens with this Convex provider. And then we are also creating a new instance of Convex by passing this environment variable next public Convex URL. Now, even though we have not created this environment variable by ourselves, we already have this variable available because we executed that convex dev command in the beginning. So during the initialization of the convex in the project, it also created this .env.local file. And when you click on this, you will see that it contains some of the environment variables automatically, like convex deployment and then next public convex URL. And this is the exact environment variable which we are using over here, as you can see. Okay, so we have created this Convex client provider. Now we need to go to this layout file, and then we need to wrap this children with the Convex client provider. So I'm actually going to wrap both navbar and main with that, like this. Alright, let's now start building our CRUD functionality. Since we are working with Todos table, I'm going to create a new file inside of this Convex folder. Let's call this todos.ts. And in this file, I'm going to add my first query function like this. So here's what I'm doing here. I'm basically importing query from generated server. So if you notice carefully that this convex directory has this folder called _generated, which contains a lot of file that is being continuously generated via the dev command of the convex. We do not have to worry about these things. It's just that we need to import a few things from here. From this generated folder server especially, I'm basically importing this query. And then I am calling query by passing a configuration object over here. Now this query has basically two important things. The first one is this arguments, but since this is a query, we do not need any kind of argument, so I'm going to remove that. And the second thing is this handler method, right? So this is basically an async function in this case. It gives you access to this context. And here's what I'm basically doing. Whenever I call this getTodos function, get all the to-dos that is present in the to-dos table and return them out of this function in a reverse order. So this is just a query that we have created. Okay, let's see how we can use this query on the client side. So inside of this components folder, I'm going to create a new folder called Todos. Within this, let's create a new file called Todo list. And this file is going to be a client component. We are importing use query from Convex React. We're importing API from Convex _generated API. And then we're calling the use query by passing the query that we have created, api.todos.getTodos. Now, initially this Todos is going to be undefined. So in that case, we are going to show an loader like this. Eventually, we will have the results from Todos. So if we do not have any kind of Todos, we will tell the user that you have not created any task yet. And then if we have the Todos, I'm simply looping through those Todos and then for now just rendering the title of the Todos. Then we need to go to home page, and inside of this home page, I'm just going to import the Todo list component and render it over here. So let's see what do we have in the browser. So now when I refresh the page, you'll see that we have this loader, and then we are seeing that we do not have any task yet. And just to show you that this is working as expected, let me add some dummy data to the database. So I'll come here, I'll click on add documents, and then here I'm going to say this is a to-do. All right, I'm gonna save it. Now, as soon as I save it, you'll notice we are already seeing the data over here. This is what we mean by the reactive database. Convex has something called sync engine. So whenever anything changes on the backend side, especially database, all of the clients that are subscribed to those changes will automatically get the fresh and latest data. This is some really powerful stuff. Okay, so at this point, we are able to read the Todos from the database. And just after looking at this loader, I'm realizing that I have not added my modified ShadCN styles. So let me quickly go to globals.css file. I'm simply going to replace this layer base with a modified one. Now this has nothing to do with Convex, it's just that it is going to apply a different kind of stylings to all over the application and nothing else. Okay, so at this point we are able to read the Todo from the database. Let's now see how we can create the Todo or insert the Todo in the database. To do that, I'm going to go to Convex directory and then go to todos.ts. And then here I'm going to create another mutation function called create Todo. Now let's import mutation from generated server like this. And let's also import v from convex values. Now the syntax of this mutation and query is very similar. You can see that I'm passing this object. This has this arguments and handler. In this argument, I'm specifying that the input for this mutation should have this title and completed. The title should be string. The completed should be boolean. And then we have this handler method. And here we're simply inserting a record in the Todos table. To be able to use this mutation, let's now create a create Todo component. So inside of this components folder and Todos folder, let's create a new component called create Todo. And here's what I'm doing in this component. First of all, this is a client component. And so far, the only thing that I have done is I have created this very simple form, which contains an input. This is just using the ShadCN form along with React Hook form library. So if we just take a look at the JSX, we have this form component from ShadCN, which contains this form JSX element. This form element has this form field. This form field has this render prop, and then this render basically returns this form item, which contains the input that we are interested in. If you go a little bit above, you'll see that we are creating a new instance of the form by calling this useForm hook. We have imported this useForm hook from React Hook form. When we call this, we need to specify two important things over here. First one is the default values. Since we are creating the Todo, the only thing that we are interested in is this title over here. Then in the resolver, I'm going to be passing Zod resolver, because in this one, I'm going to be using Zod to do the validation. We also have few other things. For example, we have this input class name. So based on few conditions, like if we have an error, the default classes and the base classes, it is going to render correct classes and apply it to the input component over here. And finally, we have this use effect, which is actually going to automatically set focus to the input whenever the page gets loaded and whenever the form is not submitting, so that we basically provide a little bit of better user experience. Now we need to create a Todo schema. So inside of this lib folder, I'm going to create a new file called zod.ts. In this one, I'm going to import Z from Zod. I'm going to export this schema, create Todo schema. And here I'm specifying that this has two properties, title and completed. The title should be a minimum of 3 characters. And if we are less than 3 characters, user should see this error message, Todo must contain at least 3 characters. And then we have this completed, which is basically a Boolean value. And the default value for this is going to be false. Now back to create Todo component. Let me quickly start the TypeScript server. Okay, now we do not have any error over here. Okay, let's now see the functionality related to the actual implementation for the Convex, specifically create Todo. So we need to import two things, use mutation and API. I'm going to be importing use mutation from Convex React and then API from Convex_generated API. Then within this create Todo function, I'm going to call this use mutation by passing my mutation that I have created. This is going to give me access to this create Todo instance. And then we are going to create this handle Todo creation function over here. So this is just going to call this create Todo that we got by calling the use mutation and then passing our mutation. In this create Todo, we are passing the title and completed. When this is success, we are resetting the form. But if there's any error related to creating the Todo, we're simply logging the error for now. And then in this form JSX element, I'm going to attach this handle Todo creation like this. So whenever this form gets submitted, we should call this handle Todo creation function. Okay, so at this point our create to-do component is ready. Let's now include this component in the home page. So above the to-do list, I'm going to add this create to-do. And now we can see that we have something like this. Let's first see if this is working as expected or not. So I'm going to say walk the dog, and you'll see that it is working as expected. As soon as we created the to-do, it basically added that to the database, and then Sync Engine reflects that change in the browser automatically. If you try to submit a to-do that is less than 3 characters, it is going to show you this error. To-do must contain at least 3 characters. Okay, so that means our validation is also working at this point. But there is a big problem here. This is actually not the server-side validation. This is just the client-side validation. And you probably know that the client-side validation is not very reliable. Now, another problem that we have, if I just go to to-dos that we have created inside of this Convex directory, you'll see that here we are specifying that whenever we are creating the to-do, the title should be string and the completed should be a Boolean value. Unfortunately, we cannot do something like this, that it should have a minimum of 3 characters. You cannot do something like that in Convex, at least according to my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. But according to me, something like this you cannot do in Convex. So what we are going to be doing is, for server-side validation also, I'm going to be using Zod only. But before I do that, let me actually show you the problem. So let's go to this create to-do component. And here you can see that in the Zod resolver, we are passing this create to-do schema. So if I just go to create to-do schema and just make it like this only, which is now equivalent to what we have in the Convex directory. Let me show you the problem with this. So this is only checking that if the title is a string or not and nothing else. So what user can do at this point? User can basically add stuff like this. And if they want, they can add a lot of empty spaces like this. And it is all going to create a to-do item. Now, obviously, you can basically stop all of the things on the client side, but that is not my point. The point is the client side validation is not very reliable. So if something goes wrong in this specific scenario, we do not have any kind of validation on the server side that is stopping the user to create as many records as possible with just empty spaces, as you can see. Let me show you. If I go to to-dos, you'll see that we have a lot of to-dos created with empty spaces over here. So this is clearly not a good user experience. So let me revert back these changes. Now, to be able to use Zod with Convex on the server side, we need to install a package called Convex helpers. So I'm gonna stop the process and then I'm going to add this package called Convex helpers. I'm gonna restart my development server. Then let's go to to-dos. Now in this file, we first need to import a few things. First of all, I'm gonna get rid of this validator builder. And then I'm going to add a few things over here. So we are importing the create to-do schema that we have created in the Zod file. Then no operation from custom functions, Convex helper server custom functions, and then Z custom mutation from Convex helper server Zod. Okay. In the arguments, I'm going to delete this object, and then I'm simply going to say create to-do schema, and the shape of to-do schema is what I'm talking about. Now, in the place of mutation, we need to use Z mutation, and we need to create a new instance of the Z mutation at the top of the file like this. So I'm going to create Z mutation. I'm going to call Z custom mutation, pass the original mutation that we get from the server. And in the second argument, I'm going to specify this no operations. Now, here's the thing. This Z custom mutation is a special custom function that allows for Zod data validation on the server side. And this no operation is a custom function, which basically means we do not want to change input in any way. So if you want, you could basically pass a custom function over here that will give you basically the ability to modify the input that you're receiving for this particular mutation and return back a specific kind of response out of this mutation. But we do not want to do that. So I'm just passing this no op that we have imported from custom functions. And then we are using the Z mutation over here. Now we just have this single schema that we have created, Zod schema, create to-do schema basically, and we can apply all of the rules that we have present in the Zod, and these rules will automatically be applicable on the server side in this specific scenario. And we are only going to reach this handler method if all of the validation gets passed. Let me show you. So if I come here, okay, the development server is already running. Let's go to create to-do component again. And in this one, you can see that I'm importing create to-do schema from Zod. Now let me actually comment out this specific line, and I'm just going to create this to-do schema specifically for this file over here. This is only for testing purpose, by the way, okay? And then I'm going to remove this min method from here. So now this basically means that on the client side, we are using this schema, which is just checking if the title is a string or not. If the title is a string, then we allow the data to pass to the backend. But in the backend side, here, we are validating data based on if it has a minimum of 3 characters or not. So that means if I try to insert a to-do that is less than 2 characters, it should throw an error. Let's see if this works as expected or not. So I'm going to come here, and then if I do TS, you'll see that we have this error, right? Server error, Zod error, too small. And if you take a look at the database, this is what we were trying to add, TS. You'll see that we do not have anything related to TS over here. That means our server-side validation is working as expected. But this is not very useful from a user's perspective, because it would be good if we could just show them a message or something over here. Let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to go to create to-do, and in this handle to-do creation function, whenever we get the error, I'm actually going to call a function that I have created for myself. Let's call this function handle to do creation error. And then, okay, let me quickly import convex error from convex values. That's it. Okay, so here's what we are doing in this one. Whenever we call this create to do, if there's a validation error, Zod is going to throw an error from the server side. We are going to capture that error, and we're going to check if that error is an instance of convex error and if it contains this Zod error property. If it contains, we basically extract out the error that we have. We assert that this is going to be an array of object, and each object is going to be of type of Zod issue. And since in this form we only have one field called title, we are trying to find if we have an error for title field. If we have, we are simply setting the form error message to the message that we got from the backend. But if the error is not related to the convex error, in that case, we're just going to set this basic error failed to create to do. So let's see if this provides any better user experience or at all. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to reload this. Now I'm going to say yes. And now you can see that to do must contain at least 3 characters. Now do not worry about this. This is only coming in case of development. Alright, that means our server-side validation is also working, and we are able to basically detect all those error message from the backend and show it to the user on the client side. Perfect. Now I'm simply going to remove this create to-do schema because we want to keep using create to-do schema that we have created in the Zod file. Okay, let's now see how we can implement the update to-do and delete to-do functionality. To do that, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create the update to-do schema and delete to-do schema in the Zod file. So let's go to zod.ts. And in this one, I'm simply going to create the schema, update to-do schema and delete to-do schema. Now, since we are updating the to-do, we also need the ID of the to-do. And if you notice carefully that this is a special ID. So this ZID that we're getting from, we need to import that from Convex helpers server Zod. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're using this CID, this is not going to validate the name of the table. It is only going to check if the ID is a string or not. So do not make the mistake of thinking that just because you have said the type of this ID is going to be the type of ID of the records that is present inside of this to-dos table, it is going to do a table name validation. It is not going to do that. It is just going to check if the ID is a string or not. And then we are going to go to to-dos that we created inside of the Convex directory. And similar to these get to-dos and create to-do, I'm going to create our other functions, update to-do and delete to-do. And let's also import these schema, update to-do schema and delete to-do schema from the Zod file like this. Perfect. So in case of update to-do, I'm just first of all passing all of the arguments that we get from Zod along with the rules. Then in the handler function, I'm calling this patch method, passing the ID of the record, and then passing the necessary data like this. And in case of delete, I'm just calling this delete method in the DB instance by passing the ID of the record. If we go to to-do list component, you'll see that for each of the to-dos, we are just rendering the title of the to-do. So let's actually create a to-do item component. So inside of this to-dos folder, I'm going to create to-do item.tsx. First of all, this is going to be a client component. This is also just rendering a form component from ShadCN. This contains a div, which contains a checkbox. And then we have this another div present over here. Below this div, we have the error message. For example, if we have the error related to the title, we're going to show them this message. And here we have a button which is going to be responsible for deleting the to-do. Now within this div, if we take a look, we have a few things over here. At the top of the function definition, if you see, we have created some of the state variables also. So is checked and set is checked is for toggling the checkbox. And then we also have this is editing and set is editing. So what happens is whenever user want to edit or update their text, what they're going to do, they're simply going to click on that text. And when they click on that text, we're going to enable the editing mode. When the editing mode is enabled, we're going to simply render this input component in place of that span component, right? And we are only going to be doing this if the task is not already completed, because it actually makes sense when you think about it. If the task is already completed, why would you edit that task? Okay. And then we have some of the class, and then we have some of the functions that are present over here. Based on some of the conditions, it is going to render the correct class in the container, which is actually going to be, you could think of this card, to-do card. And then we have this title class name. So these are going to be the default classes. If the to-do is checked, we're going to add this line through and text muted foreground classes to the text. And similarly, we have these other conditions present. And then we have this container class name. And by the way, I'm going to be providing a GitHub repo so you can take a look at all of this code by yourself. This is a very simple code, easy to understand. The only thing that we have done so far related to Convex in this specific component is one thing. So if you notice carefully that this to-do item expects you to pass a to-do prop. And the type of this to-do prop is going to be something related to doc to-dos. So if you notice carefully, I'm basically importing doc from Convex generated data model. And since we have created this schema file, as you can see, and in this one, we have specified that we have this to-dos table, which has two columns, title and completed. So this allows me to basically infer the type from that schema itself. Here, what I'm basically specifying that this to-do is going to be of type of the record from the to-dos table. Okay, so this is the only thing that we have done so far related to Convex in this file. Okay, let's now actually implement the update to-do and delete to-do functionality. Starting with the update to-do. So first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to import the use mutation and API. So let's actually import the use mutation from Convex React. And then let's also import the API from Convex generated API like this. We now have this access to this update to-do. And just like how we created that handle create to-do and handle to-do creation error in case of create to-do component, I'm going to do that same over here also. So here you can see that I have created this handle update and then handle update error. The logic of this is exactly similar to what we have done in the create to-do component. Then I'm going to attach this handle update to the form component. So I'll come here. This is the form component. I'm going to do it like this. Okay, now at this point, let's try actually seeing what do we get in the screen. So I'm going to go to to-do list component. And in the place of this P, I'm actually going to render this to-do item like this. This is going to be self-closing, so I'm gonna remove this one. Okay, 1 second. More like this. And like this. You can see that we are seeing all of these to-dos over here, right? Okay, one of the problems that we have right now is that this toggle is not working as expected. So let's fix that. I'm gonna come here and then I'm going to add this function handle toggle. And I'm going to call this function whenever we get this event on checked change. So if we just take a look at this function, what we're doing is we're setting is checked to checked. And then we're calling this handle update function, passing the ID and title and then completed status. So this is actually calling this handle update function that we have created over here, right? Which is calling the update to do instance that we got by calling the use mutation. At this point, let's now see if we are able to update our to-dos. So I'm gonna go to browser, and now when I click on this, you'll see that I do get this ability to write over here, right? That means I can write anything over here. This is a to-do item, and then I can hit enter, and just by doing that, it should have been updated. So if I just reload this page, you'll see that the update is working as expected. Okay, so what if I empty this one, hit enter, you'll see that to-do must contain at least 3 characters, right? So this is also working as expected. So I'm gonna add something here. I'm gonna reload, and yeah, this is working as expected. Now let's take a look at some of the improvements that we can make. So when I click on this, you'll see that I am able to add things over here. But what if I just erase all of this thing like this? And then obviously I can do Command Z on my computer to basically undo that change. But undo is undo is not cancel. So let's implement the cancel functionality. So what should happen is if I have erased things over here and I hit escape, it should simply revert back all the changes that I have done. So for that, what I'm gonna be doing, I'm simply going to create 2 methods. First one is this reset form to initial state. This is going to reset the form to their initial state. It is going to clear all the errors, and then it is going to disable the editing mode, right? And then we have also created this callback function that we're going to be passing, handle input key down. And we're just checking if the user has pressed the escape button on their keyboard. If they have pressed the escape button, we need to call this reset form initial state function. So in the input, I'm simply going to add that event listener on key down and pass my callback function handle input key down. Let's see if this works as expected or not. So I'm going to come here, and when I hit escape, it is simply going to revert back all those changes. Perfect. If I erase some part of it and I hit escape, it is going to revert back all those changes. Perfect. Now, one of the other improvements that we can make is when I click on this, I delete everything, and then I click anywhere outside of this to-do. So in that case also, it should undo all of the changes. It should basically cancel whatever the user has done over here because user has not pressed the enter key. So to do that, I'm going to actually add another function, more like a callback function. And let's call this handle blur. This is going to get the current title. If the current title is empty, reset the form to initial state. And also, if we do not have any errors, we are going to set the editing mode to false. And then in the form component, I'm simply going to add this event on blur and pass this callback function handle blur. So let's see if this works as expected or not. I'm going to reload the page just once. Now I can click on this. I can get rid of everything. When I click outside, it simply reverts back all those changes. Perfect. But if I click on this, delete everything, hit enter, click outside, it is still going to revert all those changes. Perfect. Okay, so at this time, our update to do functionality is working as expected. Let's now implement delete to do. So the process for this is almost same as update to do. First of all, I'm going to get the instance of the delete to do by calling this use mutation and then passing the delete to do mutation that we have created. Now we have this delete to do instance. I'm going to create this handle delete function. It is simply going to call that delete to do function by passing the ID, and that's it. If you want, you can implement error handling in this one also, but I'm not going to do that. And then I can pass this function as a callback whenever someone clicks on this delete button over here. Okay, let's see if this works as expected or not. So now when I click on this, it should delete all of these records. Perfect. It seems as if this is working as expected. Okay, so at this point, the entire CRUD is working. We are able to read Todos from the database. We are able to insert the record. We are able to update the record. We are able to delete the record. Let's now set up Convex Auth in our application for authentication and authorization. And then we are gonna make a relation between the user and Todos. Okay, the first thing that I'm gonna be doing is I'm simply going to install the package Convex Auth and then auth core specifically version 0.37.0. Then I'm going to initialize Convex Auth by executing this command pnpm-dlx convex auth. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npx convex auth. Now, the first thing that it is asking me is that in the current repository, there are a lot of uncommitted changes in the working directory. Do you want to continue or not? I'm going to say yes because I know what I'm talking about. Then it is going to configure the site URL. Since we are using locally right now, localhost 3000 is completely fine in our case. I'm going to hit enter. Then it is going to configure private and public key. Okay, and then it has done a lot of other things also. For example, it has modified tsconfig file. Do not care about that. Then it has created these two important files, auth.config.ts inside of the convex directory, and then auth.ts inside of the convex directory. And then it also created an HTTP file inside of the convex HTTP. Now let's go to auth.ts file that we have inside of the convex directory. Now in this one, we are actually going to set up all of the providers that we need to use in our application. For the sake of simplicity, in this video, I'm going to be using GitHub provider, but the process for other OAuth providers is almost identical. Now, if you want a video on other providers like email and password, just put a comment down below. I will create one. Okay, now I have also started the development server as you can see over here. Let's now go to schema.ts file. And in this one, we need to set up all of the tables that is related to authentication and authorization. We can simply import all of the auth tables that we get from Convex Auth server, and then we can pass all of these schema to define schema like this. Now notice what happens when I hit Control S to save this file, Command S to save this file basically. When I save this file, you'll see that it is basically going to push all of the changes related to these tables in the Convex deployment, right? So if I come to the browser, and now you'll see that we have a lot of tables apart from Todos, auth accounts, auth rate limits, auth refresh tokens, auth sessions, verification codes, verifiers, and users table also. So pretty much all of the tables have been automatically created for us. Next step is to wrap the entire HTML of your application with the Convex Auth Next.js server provider. So I'm going to wrap this entire HTML application like this. Then we need to go to this Convex client provider that we have created in the beginning of the video. And we need to change a few things over here. I'm going to import this Convex Auth Next.js provider. And then I'm going to wrap all of the children's with this particular thing. Then at the root of the project, I'm going to create a middleware file. So here I'm going to create a file called middleware.ts, and this file is going to be exporting a default function, Convex Auth Next.js middleware that I'm importing from Convex Dev Auth Next.js server. Okay. In this one, what I am doing is I'm just checking if the user is authenticated. If the user is authenticated and they are trying to access an auth route. Now, auth route basically in this case simply refers to all of the pages that are related to authentication. For example, sign in, forget password, all of that stuff. If you want, you can pass multiple URLs over here. Okay. Now, in my case, it is only going to be one application. I do not even need a sign up page because I'm using OAuth provider and it is automatically going to register the user. So we do not need an sign up page in that case. And then in the home page, since I'm going to basically show all of the Todos and which should only be seen by all of the users who are logged in, that is why I have specified that my home page is basically a protected route. Okay. Now here's what I'm doing within this middleware. I'm just checking if the user is authenticated. If the user is authenticated and they are trying to access the sign-in page, just simply redirect the user to the home page. If the user is trying to access a protected route and they are not authenticated, simply redirect the user to the sign-in page, which does not exist at this point, by the way. We are going to create that in a little bit of time. And finally, the config here basically specifies for which routes this middleware should be executed. Now, here I have basically copied this merger probably from the documentation. And this basically is going to execute the middleware on all routes except static files. All right. Now the final step is to configure the OAuth providers. So now we need to go to this auth.ts file that is present inside of the Convex directory. And in this one, I'm simply going to import the GitHub provider, and then I'm going to pass the GitHub provider over here like this. Okay, this is pretty much all you needed to do to set up Convex Auth in your application. Let me show you. So if I come to my application and we are not logged in, so if I try to reload this page, you'll see that it redirects me to this page auth sign in, right? And since this page does not exist, we are seeing this 404 page. Let's create the sign in page now. Inside of this app directory, I'm going to create a folder called auth. Inside of this auth folder, I'm going to create another folder called sign in. And then within this sign in, I'm going to create a new file called page.tsx. And here's what I'm doing in this file. First of all, this is going to be a client component. I'm importing some of the ShadCN components. And then here, I'm just rendering this form over here. This just has a single button, loading button component that we have to create in a little bit of time. When I click on this button, I'm calling this sign-in function that we have available. And then I'm passing the provider, and then I'm specifying where should the user gets returned after the sign-in is successful. Now void here simply means it is my way of telling TypeScript that I know that this sign-in function is an async function which is going to be running a promise, and I intentionally do not want to handle it. Now let's see from where we are getting this sign-in function. So if we go a little bit here, you'll see that I'm importing use auth actions, which is available in the Convex Dev Auth React. When you call this, you get access to this sign-in function, and then you can call this to basically log in the user, okay? Let me quickly create this loading button component. So inside of this components directory, I'm going to create this loading button component. This is just going to show a loader when the isLoading is set to true and nothing else. I'm going to restart my TypeScript server. And now we do not have any issues. So now if I try to access the sign-in page in the browser, you'll see that I am getting something like this. Welcome back, log into your GitHub account. Now there is one more step we need to do to make this OAuth work properly. So here's what you need to do. You need to basically come to GitHub settings and apps, and then you need to click on this OAuth apps. Then you need to click on this new OAuth app. Here I'm going to specify the name of the application. So let's call this Convex Fullstack app. The homepage URL is going to be localhost 3000. And now this is the interesting part, authorization callback URL. In order to get the authorization callback URL, you need to come to your Convex dashboard. Then you need to come to settings. Then in this URL and deploy key, you need to click on this show development credentials. And then you need to take this HTTP actions URL. Okay, you're going to copy that. We're going to paste it over here. Then I'm going to add API, auth, callback, and then GitHub. I'm going to register the application. We have the client ID now. I'm going to copy it. Then I'll go to my Convex dashboard, go to environment variables, going to add GitHub client ID, paste it over here, going to create another variable, GitHub client secret. Then I'm going to come to my application settings. I'm going to click on generate a new client secret. Then it is going to give me the client secret for this particular application. I'm going to copy it, come over here, and then paste it right over here. And then we can save this. And just a quick little correction before we go ahead. The name of these variables should be different. So I'm going to click on this. The client ID should be called auth GitHub ID. And then the client secret should be called auth GitHub secret. Then I'm going to save it. And by the way, if you want, you can also add environment variables directly through your terminal by executing commands like this. So you can do something like that. It is automatically going to set up the environment variables for you. If you're just placing these environment variables in your .env.local file, it is not going to work. So these environment variable should be present inside of your Convex deployment. All right. Let's now see if our authentication is working now. So I'm going to click on this login with GitHub. Now I'm going to choose my account. I'm going to authorize this application. And now you can see that I am able to access my home page. If I try going to this auth sign-in page, I am basically not allowed because I am already logged in. And we can even verify this. If I go to my Convex dashboard, go to data, then go to users table, you'll see that a new record is present over here with all of my details. Perfect. Now, since we are logged in, let's actually show the user information over here. So what I'm going to be doing is, I will go to my navbar component. Since this is a server component, I'm going to actually import is authenticated in Next.js. So this is one of the function that I can use to basically detect if the user is logged in or not. And here in place of buttons, what I'm going to be doing is, I'm actually going to call this function. So if the user is authenticated, let's actually render a component which is going to show the user details. Inside of this component, let's create a new file called user details. And here's what I'm doing in this user details component. First of all, I'm basically importing ShadCN drop-down menu component. I'm also importing the sign out component that I need to create in a little bit of time. But the most important stuff is this part. So here's what is happening. So whenever this component gets rendered, I'm calling this fetch query because this is a server component, right? And then I'm passing this function api.users.currentUser, which does not exist at this point of time. In the second argument, we are just passing this empty object. In this third argument, we are passing the token that we can use to basically authenticate this particular user, right? And then when we get the user, we're simply going to render the details over here. In order to make this query work properly, what I am going to be doing is inside of this Convex directory, let me create a file called users.ts. And in this file, I'm simply going to import this getAuth user ID, which we get from Convex dev auth server. And here's what I'm doing in this file basically. I'm simply exporting this current user function, which is a query function by the way. Now, what happens is whenever I call this current user, we simply check if we have the user ID of the currently logged in user. If we have, we simply get its information from the database by passing the user ID. And we then return this information. So let's go to user details now. You can see that we are not seeing any more errors related to API users current user. Now the last thing that we need to add is we need to create the sign out component, which is going to be responsible for logging out the user. So within this components folder, I'm going to actually create the sign out component. This is going to be a client component. I'm going to call use auth actions to get the sign out method. And similarly, this is a loading button. When I click on this button, I call this sign out function. Now I'm going to restart the TypeScript server so we do not have any more errors in this file. Let's now include this user details component in the nav bar. So I'm going to come here and let's actually import this like this. Perfect. Let's see if this is working as expected or not. So you can see that I am seeing my profile image over here. When I click on this, I'm seeing my information. And when I click on this sign out button, it basically takes me again to the sign in page. Now it may seem like that you are not on a sign in page, but if I just reload this and try to access that home page, you'll see that we are actually logged out. Perfect. That means we are able to log in and log out at this time very effortlessly. Awesome. Now the last problem that we need to fix is that all of these to-dos are not linked with any particular user. So let's see how we can fix that. I'm actually going to delete all of these to-dos first. Okay. Now in the database, we should not have any more to-dos. Perfect. We now need to go to schema file. And in this one, in this to-dos record, I'm just going to add another record called user ID. And then I'm going to reference that this user ID value is going to be the ID value from the user's record. So this is pretty much what you needed to do to create a relation between the user and to-dos. Okay. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to basically go to todos.ts and then I'm simply going to update all of these functions. So if you take a look at the functions now, when we are trying to get the to-dos, the first thing that I'm doing is checking if we have the user ID. If we do not have the user ID, that means user is not logged in. Okay. Here we have the user ID. So I'm essentially filtering all of the to-dos based on the user ID of the user. And here when we are logged in, we're simply getting all of the to-dos in which the user ID matches the user ID of the currently logged in user. Similarly, in case of create to-do, I'm just checking if the user is logged in. If they're logged in, they are able to create the to-do. In case of update to-do, I'm checking if the user is logged in. If the user is logged in, I'm checking if we have the to-do. And if we have the to-do, does this to-do belong to this particular user who is trying to update this to-do? Okay. And then finally, this user should be allowed to update the to-do. And similarly for the delete logic, if the user is logged in, if the to-do belongs to this particular user, let them delete the to-do. Perfect. I'm going to come to my application. I'm going to reload this once. I'm going to add some to-do. This is my to-do. This is my to-do again. I'm able to update these to-dos. Let me quickly log in with a different account. Log in with GitHub. I'm going to choose my another account. Authorize. And now you can see that we are not seeing any Todos. Alright, if you found this video valuable in any way, do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll catch you in the next one.